I have a pattern selected here. This is called Surf's Up, and I have quilted many quilts with this pattern even before I had the Statler Stitcher installed. We have this on a paper roll, and we followed this pattern many times with the pointer and quilted many quilts. I like to run this pattern at 5 inches height. It's designed at 7.5 high, 9.4 wide. I'm going to change the height of this to 5 and let Creative Studio adjust the width. I'm going to use repeat patterns, and I've noticed in repeat patterns when you set up an edge-to-edge project and you have vertical spacing, sometimes Creative Studio and all of its calculations changes the height of the pattern, and it will in the case of this pattern. I'm going to change my vertical spacing to negative 1.5. Okay, I'm going to put that in, negative 1.5. Hopefully it'll stay there. So I need to make this a negative. So I'm negative 1.5 vertical spacing. I'm going to enter the width of the quilt here in the total width. This quilt is 82 inches in width. It is 85 in length. It's calculated 13 repeats. I'm going to put in 85 for the length of the quilt and let Creative Studio do the calculations. It tells me I'm going to have 17 rows, 13 repeats, 17 rows. So I look at what it did up here. The width is 6.3, and that's what it was and what I want, but it has changed the height of the pattern to 6.4. In other words, it has changed it about almost 1.5 inches, and that is not what I want this to run at. So if I go ahead and click OK over here and let it put all this on the screen, it's going to do that. Right now Creative Studio is working on my project, entering all the rows and repeats. Here I have all the rows and repeats on the screen. This looks okay, and you probably would never notice that it has changed the height from the maximum height here to the maximum low point to 6.4 instead of 5 inches, and I really wanted it to be 5 inches. So I could quilt this like this and probably would never be noticed, but that's not what I want, and I've been working on a way to do this without this height being changed from 5 inches. I've exited the repeat patterns setup and gone back to look at the pattern. The height is 5 and the width is 6.23. Now I'm going to click over here and see what the adjustments actually are. It's 6.3 and 6.41, and that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted it to be 6.3 and 5.0. So I've come up with a method of correcting that. Okay, I've set up a new quilt group, and I'm looking at this pattern. It's 5 inches high, 6.23 inches the width. That's what I wanted. I'm going to go to repeat patterns, and I'm going to figure out a way of adjusting this. Remember, I'm going to use a negative 1.5 inch vertical spacing. So I'm going to be able to compensate for that. And one of the ways I did that was I changed the height of this pattern, and this pattern here has already been changed. I changed the height to 3.5, but before I changed it to 3.5 I turned off the freeze aspect and I left the width at 6.23. When I set this up, you're going to see why I did this, because the height is going to go back to 5.0 and the width is going to stay at 6.23. I'll use repeat patterns. Again, I'm going to put in my vertical spacing. I always do the vertical spacing before I enter any of the other numbers. So I'm going to put it in negative 1.5. Click OK. Now all my numbers look good. And here's my numbers: 6.23, 3.5. I'll put in my quilt width, 82. Then I'll put in my quilt length. See, it says I've got 13 repeats. Remember the last time it said up here in rows I was going to have 17 because it changed the height to 6.4. So if I put in 85 and let it do the calculations for the number of rows, it says I'm going to use 24 rows. I click OK, and it's calculating. It's figuring out the repeats in rows. Okay, Creative Studio's finished calculating. It's put all this stuff on all the repeats on the screen. And if I look over here, the only difference is that there's a slight difference in the height of 4.979, and I could actually change that to 5. Freeze aspect is off, and I'm going to go in and just change that to 5.0, and it's not going to make any difference to this calculation. Now I want to look at these and see exactly what I have. It says I have 82 width on the quilt, 85.5 is the height now, and I can make that adjustment later on for the quilt when I get towards the bottom. But right now I want to look at the individual repeats and see what it says they are. So I'm going to exit out of the repeat patterns setup. A little bit of delay. Okay, I'm out of repeat pattern setup, and I'm going to go and look at one of these repeats. Now it says it's 6.23 and 3.5. That's my original setting of this. If I click on a repeat, I select it, and it gives me the size of that repeat: 6.31 wide and 5 inches tall. And that's going to be acceptable right there. I want this to stay at 5 inches tall, not 6.4. So I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. This is going to quilt out the way I want it to quilt out. The spacing is the way that I want the spacing to appear. So I have accomplished, by using a mathematical workaround of my own, that has let me set this up the way I want to. I know there's been discussion before about using repeat patterns in edge to edge with a nesting pattern, that they said, well, I wanted it to quilt at this particular height, but when I set in all the numbers it changed the height on me. And it will, because when you just put in the width of the quilt and the height of the quilt, Creative Studio is going to do all the mathematical calculations to make the pattern fit. Okay, I have brought in another copy of the pattern, and it's in its original form. Again, I want this to be 5 inches. Freeze aspect is on. I'm going to change the height to 5 and let Creative Studio do the width adjustment, 6.23. then this is fine. This time I'm going to set this up in edge-to-edge mode. And I'm going to follow through all of the instructions, upper left, upper right, lower left, and all of that. I have all of my points clicked in, upper left, lower left. Now I'm going to enter the quilt length, which was 85. But before I do that, I'm going to put in my vertical spacing. I'm going to put in the vertical spacing as negative 1.5. I have my vertical spacing negative 1.5 entered. Up in this block, I'll put in my 85-inch quilt length. Now Creative Studio is going to do all of the calculations. It's going to put this on the screen. Okay, Creative Studio has worked through this. It has put the pattern on the screen, and if you look at this area right here, you'll see that the width was 6.22, the height was 4.98, so that's really close to 5. And I suppose I could go ahead and change that to 5, but it's so close to 5 I'm not going to bother with it. Now, since I don't really like quilting in the edge-to-edge mode, I'm going to change this to the repeat patterns mode. And the way I'm going to do that is simply let this, I'm going to go ahead and click quilt, and then Creative Studio is going to move the machine to the start point of the first pattern and take a stitch, and it has done that. Then it tells me to pull up the bobbin thread, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to click stop, and it says you're not finished quilting. Do you want to stop? Yes, I do. Okay. So now, what am I going to do next? I'm going to right click. I'm going to relocate, shift all to one point, and it's going to come up with this little, okay, do you really want to do this? It's going to change it to an E to E repeat patterns, and yes, that's what I want to do. And I go up with my end snap turned on, and I let it snap to the start point of the first repeat in the first row. I left click the mouse, and when Creative Studio is finished thinking, I'm going to click yes, and again Creative Studio will go through, and it says, oh, you are now in repeat patterns edge to edge. Well, that's cool. That's what I wanted it to be in. You see this gap at the top? That's not really what I want, and I'm going to do some work on this to change that so that I don't have this open space at the top of the quilt. I've shown you just exactly how easy it is to set up in the edge-to-edge mode, how you can modify your pattern height to compensate and make it do what you want it to do. And I've also shown you how to set up an edge-to-edge project in the edge-to-edge mode and then change it to the repeat patterns edge-to-edge mode. If I click on one of these repeats, I'm going to see what it says. It says, oh, okay, it's 6.22 and 4.98. That's close enough to the numbers that I want in the first place, and that's what I want to do. Now, one of the good things about setting up in the edge-to-edge mode is the edge-to-edge mode does not stretch the pattern to fit like repeat patterns mode does when you're doing an edge-to-edge with a deeply nested pattern.